Okay, let's talk propulsions. Before I get into it, can anyone tell me what when I say propulsions, what does it mean to you? I'll take like two answers, three answers. Thrust. Any more answers? Okay, fine. So what does a propulsive system of a rocket do? Altitude control. Okay. So a propulsive system is effectively the heart of the rocket. It's what provides the thrust that lifts the rocket up into the sky. Now, propulsive systems are a very complicated piece of design and engineering. They take a lot of skill to develop, and they take sometimes up to years to perfect and get to a range where they make sense to manufacture. You can theoretically design a propulsive system using theory, but without practical knowledge and experience, you will never be able to make a system that works. So on the screen right now, you can see two types of very commonly used engine slash motor. On the left, you can see an RS-25, and on the right, you can see a GSLV. Okay, I just use the word motor and engine. Can someone tell me why I'm using two words instead of one? Priyansh?
A motor is used for solid fuel, I guess, and engine is used for liquid engines.
Yeah, that's correct. So, but why? Why is solid a motor and liquid a engine?
Uh, a solid one pushes the fuel automatically, but a engine requires a motor or something like that.
Oh, no. So it's effectively it's convention, and it's due to the fact that solid fuels cannot be throttled or shut off mid-flight. You can pre-program of sorts a burn plan into a solid motor. It's called a grain. We'll get there. But a liquid you can actively throttle. So you can actively throttle it down when you have too much thrust. You can actively throttle it back up to full rated power when you feel you need more thrust, and you can shut it off and restart it. That is not the case with solids. Per flight, you only get one firing out of them. So that's the convention. Anything you can light only once, it's a motor. Now, solids and liquids, there's a few differences that go along. Namely, solid propellants are they're not as efficient as liquid, but they have, and nor do they pack as much of a punch. But as you can see, solid propellant rockets are very popular. This is for a number of reasons. Solids store very well. You do not need any cooling or any other conditioning. You load them up into the rocket. They can wait on the pad, and when you light them, they go up. Liquids are not like that. They require careful handling. They require heavy tanks to store the pressurized liquids. They need pumps. They need a system called a feed system to move the liquid from the tanks into the combustion chamber where the combustion happens. So they're heavier, but they deliver more power. So solids are most universally popular among amateurs. What all is used as solid fuel? Okay, so solid fuel, there's quite a few types. You have a variety of things. So you have a fuel in general with rockets, in chemical rockets, is an oxidizer and a fuel. So we call both of them together a propellant. A fuel usually is a hydrocarbon. So the more popular ones you will know of are RP1, which is a type of kerosene. Another that's a liquid. Another common liquid is liquid hydrogen. Not a hydrocarbon, but a very good fuel. In solids, we have aluminium powder. Metal powders are a very commonly used fuel. There's a few others, a few hydrocarbons. Amateurs mostly use a sugar-based compound. Now, what if we combine both of them together? Potato chips with constant oxygen supply works too, right? Yeah, unfortunately not. You cannot pressurize a potato chip rocket. Pressure is a huge part of what powers a motor, so you cannot use potato chips. Now, what if you combine both? Can anyone guess what happens in a hybrid rocket? You're looking at it, but what really happens?
Oxidizer is separately flowed through the solid fuel section, while in a solid fuel, it is already embedded with the fuel.
Yes, in solid, both are premixed. In liquid, both are kept separate. But in hybrid, one is a precast solid. So you have a precast solid section, right, which is in the combustion chamber. And then you have a liquid stored in a tank. Now, usually the liquid is the oxidizer and the solid is the fuel. This is simply because liquid oxidizers are more efficient compared to liquid fuels, and they're complement. But hybrids are highly experimental technology and are not used in mainstream and are very rarely used in amateur rocketry. There's a reason why solid is the most popular in amateur rocketry. Can anyone guess? Why? Why do we prefer solid more than anything in amateur rocketry? Even the ORK we're making, we will be using a solid motor. Yes?
They're easier to handle and store.
Yeah, they're easier to handle and store. They're also cheaper to develop, easier, less complex. The list goes on. They just don't deliver as much power, but their advantages are a handful. All right, so before we go any further, we need to discuss a few important terms. So what is specific impulse? Specific impulse is basically the measure of a rocket's efficiency. Now, we need a term to describe efficiency. The word efficiency means quite very little with rockets. So we have a term we use called a specific impulse. Now, you can see the formula on your screen. It's effectively just the total impulse of the rocket divided by the weight of the expelled propellant. So mass into acceleration. Acceleration at the Earth's surface, weight. But what are these terms? These terms are complex mathematical terms that I will not be going too deep into, but just know when I say specific impulse or ISP, I mean efficiency. Similarly with total impulse, when I say total impulse, just understand that I mean total power delivered by the motor. It's not actually a total power, but it's effectively the force. It's the integral of force through burn time, right? So it's measured in Newton seconds. But when I say total impulse, just think that I'm saying power of the motor. It's a very easy amalgamation, analogous. So think of it like that. The actual mathematical meaning of these terms is too complex for the purposes of this workshop. Right, nozzle. So we've been hearing a lot about our nozzle. What is a nozzle? Can you guys answer? Anyone? What is a nozzle?
It is the place where the exhaust gases are released to produce a thrust.
Yes. Okay. So it's the place where exhaust gases are released to produce thrust. Any other answers? Yeah. Just speak up. Priyansh. Anyone else?
Akhil also had his hand up.
Oh yeah, Akhil.
It would contain and direct the outflow of the gases.
It will contain and direct the outflow of the gases. Okay, so on your screen you can see, okay, just look at the top row for now. Please ignore the lower rows for the purposes of this workshop, since we have a time constraint. What can you see on the top row? You can see 6 different type of nozzles, right? Now, these nozzles vary in performance and characteristics. Some are very clearly better than others, and for a variety of factors. If you look at manufacturing, the one on the left extreme, cone, it's very easy to manufacture comparatively. But the third one from the left, your bell-shaped, shortened, or your full bell, these are very efficient nozzles and are easy to cool, especially in liquid rockets. Solid rockets generally stick to cones. It's easier and you can't really cool them any which way. You can just protect them from the thermal heat. aerospike and plug are the three on the right are highly experimental nozzles. They have a few issues with heating, but have their own merits, but we will not be going into them. You can try to read up on aerospikes. It's a very fascinating field. You can DM us on Instagram after the workshop if you have queries. Yes, any questions? Speak up if you have a question, please. The glitch is preventing me from seeing any raised hands.
Can you tell what expansion deflection is in very short?
Expansion deflection. Okay, so expansion deflection, it's a complicated scenario. So what your nozzle is a big thermodynamic device. It's expanding your gas, which is at a high pressure, low velocity state in the combustion chamber, and at a very high velocity, low pressure state at the exit. Exit is the end of the nozzle. It's the last part of the nozzle. You might remember the word exit from boat tail. Your boat tail end is manufactured using nozzle exit specifications. So your exit, so it expands through this. So now when, but you introduce deflections in the pattern, it creates a few desirable, undesirable properties. So it's not something we really should go into right now because it's a very complicated and a vast field. There is no simple way of putting it.
Okay.
All right. So now this is an SRB core. What is an SRB? You should be able to answer this.
Solid rocket booster.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Solid rocket booster.
Yeah, it's a solid rocket booster. This specific one is actually the one that powered the space shuttle. It's a segment of that. So solid motors are made in segments. This what you can see right here is a segment. They're not manufactured all at once because that's very inconvenient. So you can see there's a metallic casing, then outside. You can see there's a hollow tube down the middle. That's called a core. And then you can see a black segment, a black mass. That's your propellant. This particular propellant is black in color, so that's what it is. And there's a thin liner between the propellant and the casing, which you can't really see in this picture. A liner effectively protects the casing, which is metallic, from combustion temperatures, which are very hot. So most metals would easily melt. So your liner protects your casing. These are usually very thin materials, so you can't really see it in this picture. But why the hole? Can anyone guess why there's a hole down the center? The core.
Yeah, okay.
Because the propellant will burn from the inside out, so there should be a place for the gas to escape.
Okay, so why is the propellant burning inside out? We can just have a no-hole thing, and the propellant can burn from the bottom where the nozzle start is up to the top where the head is. Head is the top of the motor.
Then by the time it reaches the top, the thrust would be differentiating. I mean, it wouldn't be as much as from where it started.
No, but okay, so I'll just make it clear. Your thrust is a function of the surface area that's burning. Now, but the surface area burning is constant. This configuration is called an N burning configuration. Your surface area is constant. So why will your thrust decrease? So your thrust won't decrease. That's the thing. As long as your chambers are short enough, your thrust won't decrease. But if your chamber is very long, then you will start losing pressure towards the end. So that's a reason why thrust can decrease in very long chambers. But a circle is a very simple configuration. There's actually many different types of configuration that the grain can be cast in. Here you can see 6 popular examples. Now, why do we cast them in different shapes? A circle is very easy to cast. You have a simple coring tool. You use it, cast, and then remove the tool. The rest of these have a more complicated design. This is all to do with something called a thrust time curve. You can see each individual thrust time curve is next to its segment. So you can see the amount of thrust being produced at any instant with respect to time on that. So your circular gives you something called a progressive curve. It goes up, it continuously increases because your surface area burning is increasing. You get that, right? Your surface area, as it burns out, you can see the arrow on the burning surface. And then once the propellants consumed, your thrust goes to 0. Your rod and tube gives you a very neutral burn. So your thrust is constant through your burn. It makes it very predictable. Sometimes you have regressive burns like the one in the first column bottom. This, you get a lot of power off the pad, but as your propellant burns out, you get less power. In some situations, this is highly desirable. So these situations vary on your requirement and largely depend on when you finally do go into manufacturing your own motors. Before I start burn rate, anyone has any questions you want me to answer up till now?
The profiles that you showed right now, do you know any which profiles are used in ISRO's solid rocket boosters?
Usually the agencies do not reveal this. Sometimes if it's highly open and public, then you can notice them, but ISRO is actually a very secretive organization. You can find very little info on in detail about their vehicles.
Okay.
But I guess if you search deep enough, you can, but unfortunately, I do not know what configuration they use.
Okay.
I have a doubt. So, do each one of these configurations result in variation in the specific impulse?
In specific impulse, no. Specific impulse is a function of your motor as a total. So yeah, your total. Now, if you notice, your total it's also a function of your total impulse. So if you notice, you have a different area under your curve in each case, right?
Yeah.
You can clearly see it. It's quite visible. You can also clearly see that in the ones on the right, you clearly carry less propellant. It's not the most optimized in terms of how much propellant you're carrying. It's not volume optimized.
All right.
So yes, they do affect how much efficiency. They do not directly affect your efficiency, but they affect the total impulse very clearly. So.
Thank you.
All right. So burn rate. Burn rate is basically the rate at which your core increases in size. That's a very simple way to put it. It's called a regression rate or regression of the surface. So you can clearly see where the surface will be at T1, 2, and 3, right? Now your outer surface is called an inhibited surface. We apply a special coating on the outside to ensure that it does not burn. This is because it would result in a few very obvious undesirable scenarios. Can you guys guess what these scenarios would be if your outer surface burns? Okay, just for reference, I'll pull up the NASA pic. Yeah, so what will happen if the outer surface burns? Now remember the rocket's vertical.
Yeah, Akhil wanted to answer it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there would be a alternate exit for the gases, and it could cause an imbalance in the forces, causing the rocket to.
No, the exit is still the same. It's still the nozzle. But if your outer surface burns, and your outer surface, the way the propellant grain is attached to your casing, it's no longer attached to your casing, which will result in explosion. Your motor will blow up. So that's why you have to inhibit your outer surface. Now, usually it inhibits itself because that's where you attach it to the casing, the liner, my bad. So you can clearly see on the pic on the right, the burning surface in this circular configuration. Now, this circular configuration is very popular among amateurs who are building their own motors. They're called Student Researched and Developed Motors, SRAD. This is because they're very easy to build and they have very predictable properties. You can clearly tell what's going to happen when, because the surface area is a simple circle. The burning surface area is a simple circle, so very predictable, very desirable. Now, your burn rate depends on pressure. So one thing is your combustion chamber is always at a high pressure, is in a high pressure situation. It's The higher pressure, the more. Now you can clearly see burn rate goes up. That means your thrust goes up. So higher pressure gives you more thrust. It's as simple as that. Here, N is a mathematical term called a pressure exponent. We will not be going into what that is. But yeah, higher burn rate equals more thrust. That's a simple way to understand it. These are just terms I'm telling you because when you do go in for the motor insertion ORK, these are parameters we have to look at. Without knowing these, we cannot duly insert a motor without getting some invalid result. We need to know what we're doing. So these are all terms we need to know. So before I go further, can you guys, if you have any doubt, term that still confuses you, anything you might have ever heard, please ask now. Don't raise hand, just ask. I cannot see raised hands.
You said that when the outer surface burns, it could be there could be an explosion. So is that what happened when Challenger blew up, Space Shuttle Challenger?
Oh no, Space Shuttle Challenger blew up because an O-ring failed.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the same.
No. So you can see that there's segments, right?
Yeah. So
between segments, some hot gases seep through the segments. Now they're usually stopped by the O-ring, but it was too cold that day, so the O-ring failed. I'm not going to go into how O-rings work. It's a very complicated field. But an O-ring failed, and it heated up the external tank next to the booster, and that blew up. Okay, so that's a nice question. Any terms you guys want me to answer before I go into COTS and SRAD? We'll be focusing on the ORK from here on, that's why.
What exactly do you mean by the grain?
Okay, grain. A grain or a grain geometry is the shape. The propellant grain is the propellant itself in a solid motor. So what the nomenclature is, it's a grain. It's a propellant grain. Do you understand what I'm saying? I know it's a bit weird to understand.
Do you mean just the shape itself or the composition too?
The cast propellant is called a grain. The propellant in its required geometry or shape inside the entire mass of propellant. So you see in this case it's a hollow cylinder. That's the grain.
Okay, thank you.
Is it understandable? Because a grain is a very important terminology. So your propellant cast in its form inside the motor is the grain. Alright, so let's move on to COTS and SRAD. So COTS is basically commercial off the shelf, which means these are motors you buy. Companies make them, you buy them, you use them. It's as simple as that. You don't really develop anything. So as people in Kushal and everybody up till now, they've showed you how the rocket is built around the motor, right? With COTS, there's nothing really in it. You just put a motor in that rocket and you fly. You do build the rocket with respect to what motor you're finally going to use, but you have no say what goes inside the motor or how the motor itself is made. An SRAD is a student research and develop motor. This is what students make. This one was made by the rocketry team at MIT for static testing. So this was not meant to fly, this particular motor, but it was used for a ground test. Now a COTS motor is desirable because they're efficient, because they've been built by people with a lot of experience. They're cheap, mass produced. They're safe. They've been built with a very high degree of safety to conform with all international standards. And they're reliable because again, they're built by people with a lot of experience. SRAD motors, now it depends on the student developing it, does it not? You have a guy who's brilliant, you have a team, it's never a guy, it's a team. You have a team who's brilliant, then your motor will easily outperform an equivalent COTS motor. There's no doubt about it. But for beginners, that's hardly ever the case. You cannot make a motor on your first try. And for amateurs, it's not advisable to make a motor. It's very much advisable to stick with COTS because the amount of safety you get with COTS, you simply do not get with SRAD. SRAD is a very dangerous affair. So from here on out, as far as the ORK is concerned, we'll be sticking with COTS, but we will keep looking in at what the SRAD equivalent would be. But for today, we shall be using a COTS. Now insert COTS, there's a huge library in ORK. We will be using that to insert the motor. We will not be designing it. Now this is a NASA SRB, and on the right we have a COTS motor. So you can see it's covered, right? That's the nozzle, that's the exit, and you can see how the boat tail is designed around it. This is to allow for fully free expansion of the nozzle. Why do we need to allow for the nozzle to expand? And by this degree, you can see how big the difference is.
So that you get maximum thrust.
Akhil, please, we'll take turns. Yeah, Akhil, what's your answer?
Yeah, because the metal will reach extreme temperatures and the thrust would cause it to expand.
The thrust won't cause it to expand, but the heat will. The heat will cause it to expand. Thermal heating, thermal expansion. It's a very common phenomenon. You can see it everywhere. Okay, so a quick question. Why are both these nozzles covered? I mean, common sense dictates a nozzle stay open, so the exhaust gases can leave. Why are these covered?
So that maybe contaminants don't get in and damage them.
So contaminants don't get in and damage the grain. Yeah, that's a good answer. Yeah. So one reason is you don't want any impurities getting in through the nozzle, because the nozzle's, well, it's open. You want stuff to come out. You'll automatically allow stuff to go in.
Maybe to prevent it from getting moisture.
Yes, to prevent it from getting moisture. Quite a few solid propellants are highly hygroscopic, i.e. they just suck up water from the atmosphere. It's a very common phenomenon. Most sugar-based propellants are highly hygroscopic. APCP, which was used for the solid NASA's SRBs, is hygroscopic. So you cannot let, and water highly deteriorates your efficiency and your burn properties. Your motor will no longer perform anywhere close to what it would if it was fully dry. So that's why you need to cover the nozzle up. Now this particular cover is, in both cases, made using a special aluminum sheet for maximum protection. All right, so static testing. Now, why is static testing important? No two solid motors are ever perfectly the same. You can try to mass produce them, but you will get slight differences in the grain simply because that's how the process is. So why is static test something that mostly won't even fly? A very, very similar version will fly, but it particularly won't. So why do you have to static test it?
Calculate its thrust.
Oh no, we calculate thrust using mathematical means. You can't, because to iteratively achieve your thrust is impossible. There's too many variables involved.
To test the structural strength of the SRB.
Again, yeah. So testing anywhere in engineering is a vital thing. You can prove it mathematically, you can prove it simulationally, but you always must prove it testing. You must test it. You must physically prove it. So first, we have to show that the nozzle can take it, the entire casing can take it, your head can take it, and your burn properties are also what is expected. So you're getting the desired impulse out of your motor, your total impulse. That's something that we look at testing. One thing you will notice is there's quite a lot of bracing. So this motor is very much nailed down to the ground. There's a huge concrete block. It's actually not really in frame. You can just see the end of it, which extends from the head of the motor quite far. It's a huge block NASA uses. So these blocks actually prevent the motor from moving. The amount of thrust being delivered is so high, anything else could simply fail. So this was a similar test done by the rocketry team. You can clearly see even this, it's a smaller motor, obviously. But you can still see the amount of bracing and protection that had to be placed, and it was done in a full bunker, and there's a huge concrete block stopping it. So that's the amount of caution you need to exercise. I think you guys would have noticed by now, solid propellants, solid propel rockets leave out the plume, the exhaust coming out is bright orange and well opaque. You can't really see through it. But if you remember your liquid exhaust, you can pretty much see straight through them. They're translucent too, almost transparent. Why? Why do you think that is?
The temperature at which the fuel burns.
It's less to do with the temperature, more to do with what you're burning. The RS-25 showed.
The liquid propellants are a very rich mixture, so it
It's
burns
not-
completely.
Yeah, it's again
Complete combustion.
your stoichiometry depends on your design. There's quite a few factors that go into it regarding the feed system, etc. But one thing in general is the rocket I showed you, the RS-25, that burns hydrogen and oxygen. So the exhaust is basically water vapor. That's basically why you can stay straight through it. Liquid engines like which burn RPO1 will look more. They won't look like this. Solid plumes are nowhere near as clean as liquid plumes, but that will also be bright and orange and dirty.
Isn't it because of whether it is fuel rich or oxygen rich, oxidizer rich flow?
So your stoichiometric ratios do have something to do with it. When you burn fuel rich, you get a more sooty exhaust. You burn more oxidizer rich, you'll get clean, but your exhaust still won't be optimum. A stoichiometric burning ratio is most desired because it's the most efficient. Oxidizer rich, your plume will be much cooler, which is highly undesirable. All right, so now math. Now propulsion is less about explosions and lighting rocket motors and more about the math. You need to figure out what motor you can use to get to your target apogee. Now, two very simple equations that we use to start off. These equations by no means is what we use to calculate anything. The final product. These are just the start. The one on your right, the bottom, just look at the bottom lines for now. The rest is its derivation and we don't want to go there. So the one on the right, it gives you the thrust, F, at any given point. So m dot means mass flow rate. I the rate, the kgs, it's kgs per second. So the mass flowing out at any given instant. V is exit velocity of the plume of the exhaust gases at the exhaust of the nozzle. PE and P naught are pressures. PE is exhaust pressure of the gas at the exit. P naught is atmospheric or ambient pressure. It decreases as we fly higher. And AE is the area of the exit. Don't worry, we don't really need to go into any of this. It's okay if you don't really understand where this is going. It's just thrust, and on the right you have delta U calculations or delta V calculations, which is basically the change in velocity you will get after a particular rocket engine / motor fires. So after its entire burn, once it's burnt out, what's the change in velocity you will get? But one important assumption in this particular equation is we ignore drag. So it's not really what you will get, but it's theoretical values. Now these two are basics of what we use to finally get to calculating the total impulse required to reach our apogee. Right. So now the full equation, there's no one equation, there's multiple equation after equation. Even ORK uses a huge flowchart to calculate these parameters. So we will not be going into any of these simply because it will take way too long and it's way too complex. Okay, so now this is something we need to learn before we can go into ORK. We will be getting to ORK and motor insertion quite soon. Can anyone just guess what this is, what table we're looking at? It's a relatively straightforward table, I hope. Any guesses? You can go crazy. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I think there's some problem with his microphone, so we'll take other answers.
Yeah, anyone else? I'm sorry.
He's saying engine classifications. I mean, the power. I guess that's what he's saying.
Yeah, so it is a classification. The caption clearly states that it's a solid rocket motor classification. So you can see on the rightmost column, you can see type. Type is micro, low power, mid power, and then there's 3 levels for HP, high power. So you have HPL1, HPL2, and HPL3. Now our target apogee is 3,000 meters, and our rough rocket weight right now is, I'm not actually sure, but looking at the way it's going, it'll probably end up around 23 kgs, the mass. So if you plug these into the equations given behind, these equations plus more equations and solved with drag included, will probably require an M or an L or maybe even an L class motor. So that's HPL2 or HPL3. Now you can clearly see in the first column you have letter grades. So you have half, 1/4, 1/8, A, and then A through O. Now you will see O stops at 40,960 newtons. Now, real commercial rockets like the ones ISRO or NASA or anyone else launches, non-sounding orbital vehicles, they do not use this scale. Their classifications would be, they don't use the scale. We can extend the scale to that level, but they don't use it. They just use the total impulse as as an absolute value. This table is exclusively for amateurs. An O class can probably propel the vehicle we are building in ORK up to say 4 to 5,000 meters. That's about it. So this is for even a high power is not really that. It's high power for sounding rockets. Now you can see it's clearly bracketed off into groups. So you have, we will be ignoring the first 6, 7 because they're very, very low powered. They're effectively just water bottle rockets. So they're not real rockets. After that, you will see as we go down, the bracket size increases. So you can see more and a bigger gap between each. So yeah, this is just a table you look to roughly predict where your motor will be. It's mainly for COTS where you're ordering your motor. We probably will require somewhere between an L to an N mode class. We definitely won't be needing an O. We definitely cannot use anything under a K. We simply won't get enough power. All right. So this is a cross-sectional view of a solid rocket motor. Now this is what you would expect to see inside. You have two views here. The upper one is for, now these are two different designs I might add. The upper one is without a grain in it. Yeah. So this should explain what a grain is quite clearly. Can you tell? The upper one has no grain, the lower one has a grain. So it's you can also clearly see the liner in the lower one. It's blue in color, the cross section. In the upper one, you can sort of make the liner out. It's a very thin layer. You can clearly see the casing, similar thicknesses. You can see the head, i.e. the bit at the top of the motor that prevents anything from escaping out of the head, because above the head you have the thrust plate and then you have an avionics bay. So it would fry everything and also it would lead to an explosion. Then you can see retainers. We spoke about retainers yesterday, right? Does anyone remember what a retainer is? Okay, so a retainer is effectively what it states it is. It retains when the motor is not working, i.e. it's either burnt out or before launch, it ensures that the nozzle does not and the head do not come out of the motor. When it's firing, its own internal pressure ensures this happens. You can also see very clearly how segmenting works in the lower picture. So you clearly have two propellant segments here, and you can clearly see the core, the propellant segments, the liner, the casing. And this particular design has a different retainer design, but we will not be going into retainer design because COTS comes with a retainer inbuilt. So we do not really look into that. This is all SRAD designing. Another core segments. So you can clearly see. Now, why do we cast in segments? Can anyone answer? I think I answered this myself, but I'll still ask it. Okay, no answers. It's simply out of convenience. You cannot cast a 3-4 meter long tube of propellant which is highly flammable and almost explosive in nature. So we, for safety and ease of manufacturing, we cast it in smaller segments. That's pretty much the only reason we cast it in segments. All right, let's igniters. Now a question is, how do we ignite a motor? Any ideas you guys have? How do we ignite the motor? Don't have to follow what's on screen. Any idea that pops into your head, please share.
Spark plug maybe.
Okay, spark plug. Okay, along with your igniter idea, please specify if it's a liquid igniter or a solid igniter. They're different. They're quite different.
For spark plug is for a solid igniter, and the liquid. I mean, both.
Okay, why do you think it's for solid?
Because solid fuel just needs a spark, and then it just keeps on burning until you run out of it.
Okay, here's a very common misconception. What do you think those sparks at the? So you guys have seen shuttle launches, right? If you have, just stick your hand up. You've seen a space shuttle launch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you look at it, right before launch, once they start the shuttle main engines, that's the 3 liquid engines beneath the orbiter itself, you see there's a lot of sparks being shot out. What do you think those sparks do? They're starting right at the moment of ignition.
I'd heard that they were to ignite vapors or gas of some kind. I'm not really sure, but
yeah. So the space shuttle's main engine uses hydrogen as the fuel, liquid hydrogen, but in the combustion chamber it obviously becomes a gas. So you having unburnt hydrogen underneath the vehicle is very, very dangerous because hydrogen is explosive. So those sparks are to burn out the hydrogen. A common misconception is that they actually ignite the engine itself. It is completely wrong. All engines are ignited in the combustion chamber itself. All right. So what are we looking at on the screen? Anyone has an answer? These are called pyrotechnic igniters. It's quite clearly labeled. So can you guess what it's doing? What's the mechanism of ignition? And if they're used in solid or liquid?
I can see a nichrome bridge wire, so I'm assuming in the solid, in the yellow one. That's I guess the solid one.
The one on the right is just the left is a cross-section view of the right. They're the same thing.
Oh, sorry. So in the left one, I guess I can see a nichrome bridge wire. So an electrical lead. So it must be heating up and causing spark, or it may be heating up till it is red hot metal, igniting the propellant.
Okay, so what's happening right now is you have this is something called a pyrotechnic igniter. You're using an electrical current to heat up a metal or an object of high resistance. So in this case, nichrome. Nichrome has a very high specific resistivity. So it heats up. Now you have here it's called a loose MDP pyrolint. It's surrounding the wire. Now this ignites. This ignites when the nichrome gets quite hot because of high resistance and a high current passing through it. This ignites a granular propellant, and this propellant sort of works like a shotgun. It fires in all directions. This is usually placed somewhere near the bottom of. Now this pyrotechnic is only used in small motors. So the classification we saw earlier, it's only used in these. Anything above an O, you have to go to a different realm of ignition. We will not look into that. We'll just stick with small ignition. So this is used for small solid rocket motors. This shotgun is a shotgun type action, spreads propellant, this hot granular ignition mixture everywhere, and this ignites the internal surface of the core. This is placed usually right above the nozzle, and the electrical leads are directed in either through the nozzle or through the head as per design. But for convenience, it's mostly through the nozzle. They're just shot out of the nozzle when the motor ignites. Another possible, the spark plugs that you mentioned, those are used only for liquids. You cannot ignite a solid using a spark plug. Simply because the spark plug does not produce the required amount of energy to ignite a grain. Grains require a lot of heat to ignite. Liquids, you have two highly combustible gases coming in contact. It takes very little energy to really ignite them. So yeah, you have a very high powered, it's similar in principle to what you have in a car, but it's actually very different in design. That's used in liquids. Okay, what would happen if we just, okay, so we have an igniter ready. Now we just put the igniter, we insert the igniter as a design and then we just leave it on the pad. Is that safe? Is it safe to have an igniter where the only thing standing between an ignition and a safe state is one electrical current passing through it? Now understand that the battery has also been wired in. So is this a safe scenario to have? Or is it a desirable scenario?
No, it's not safe, I guess.
So what can we do to make it safe? Because this has to be, this scenario has to happen. You need to have your igniter loaded in, you need to connect your battery, and your circuit needs to be ready to fire when the appropriate button is pressed. So how can you make it safe? So yeah, go ahead. Dheeraj, go ahead.
Are those two slots on either side of the body are gonna help or something?
No, that's just the igniter design. This actually, so have you guys ever heard of something called an arming feature? You'll hear it around a lot of things, drones, rockets, explosives of any kind, an arming feature.
Yeah.
So guys, can you just explain what an arming feature is? An arming key or an arming button?
It disables some kind of a safety measure.
So it itself is a safety measure. So we have to use something called a two-step arming procedure. That means you need to have at least two safeguards to prevent accidental ignition. So once everything's set up, you still have two parts where the circuit's broken. Only when those two parts are completed do you have ignition. You can stick with one. Now, normally we need to have the one, but you can. That leaves a lot of room for inadvertent ignitions. Two reduces the probability by a huge amount. So that's a very safe way to play it. So that's the norm. Okay, at this point we will proceed into the ORK. So Anish, can you please bring the ORK up? Let's walk through how to insert a motor into the ORK.
Okay, so at this point we have extended our time limit by a lot, I would say. So please bear with us, guys. It'll be like 15-20 minutes more and we'll wrap up the session. And yeah, Advait, could you please only use one motor for the demo?
Yeah. Okay. So now we have to insert a motor. So we go to motors and configurations. First step is designating a motor mount. So in this case, it's quite clearly we labeled it the motor bay. So the motor bay is the motor mount. We just select the required option. We now press a new configuration, new select motor, or we just double click on the blue line. Okay, so now first in your options, all will be selected. So Anish, please hit select all. Now first step is to hit clear all to remove everything. This is the situation you would be at. Now, okay, so now we'll have to make an assumption. So let's assume that Aerotech and Sroni are the only two manufacturers available to us. The rest for some reason are not available. So this filters it out quite a lot. We already know we want an L through an N, so we'll add that filter into total impulse. Actually, now that looking at the calculations more carefully, I know that even an N probably will be an overkill, so we'll move it down to an M. The filter will just make it purely M. Even the lower bound onto an M, please. Thanks. Motor dimensions. So now first the diameter. So usually M's for quarts are around 75 to 98. So that's what will make the lower and upper bound, 75 and 98. and length we shall make between 500 to 700. This is all basically with what you have designed. These are not arbitrary numbers that I'm saying. So this is basically the dimensions that will fit in our rocket. So we're taking these dimensions and filtering. Now we'll find a motor that looks desirable. So we want around 8,000 Newton seconds. So we'll scroll down until we can see 8,000 in the third column, total impulse. And we'll now select the Aerotech 1845. So that's 8,093 Newton seconds. That seems pretty ideal. Yeah, all its parameters are good, but to finally decide, we'll go to show details. Okay, so now here you can see a few very important criteria. You can see the average thrust, max thrust, burn time, launch mass, and dry mass. So all the calculations I've shown you, etc., it's come done for you. All you have to do is just look at these parameters and you're good to go. You can also see the thrust and curve. We'll expand it. Yeah. So you can clearly see the profile this motor burns in. So all of these are crucial for deciding, but all of this looks good to us. We're getting the total impulse we want. The burn time is nice and steady. Your average thrust is good. Your max thrust is something our structure can take, because you have to design your structure to take the max thrust. So we will go ahead and close the thrust time curve and press OK to insert the motor. Okay, now you can see that the motor is not really sitting right. It's halfway up the payload bay. So we will go to motor mount or motor bay, go to motors option and set in the required overhang. So now the rear end of the block you see is the nozzle. It comes as the same diameter, but in reality it's depicting a nozzle. So we'll push the nozzle to the end of the boat tail where it's supposed to be. So this is our motor overhang. Now if you remember, all the centering rings are they're not hollow; they're a solid piece. So we should now set the appropriate internal diameter. In this case, 98. 9.8, 98 cm, and the required outer diameter. Okay, so if this happens, you can just click on automatic. It'll reconfigure itself. 13.6. Okay, so see, right, it falls right back into place. You'll have to always keep track of your units, not only in rockets, but in engineering in general. Now you can also see our dampener and our thrust plate are halfway down the motor. So we'll have to move them back up. We just go to the correct required component and just move the position relative to the required parent component and just move it up. It's as simple as that. So now our motor bay looks like what it looked like in the CAD that Kushal showed you, right? So now we collect all the final, the motor bay was a bit longer than required, so we'll reduce that. So now we can see our apogee. It's good. We hit our target. 3000 has been hit comfortably so. And all the parameters are good and stable. But there's one thing that's missing. If you look at stability, which was explained to you yesterday, it's completely ruined. It's negative right now. CP is ahead of CG. This is because when we added the motor, we pulled the center of gravity backwards. So Anish will now walk you through fixing this.
So I'm audible, right? So since we are in a bit of time constraint, I'm going to rush through this. So try to be quick and understand what I'm doing. So we have put the motor, but there are some few missing components, and even the stability has gone bad. So you can see it's at negative. So first we need to, I'm going to start off with adding a parachute, just a dummy parachute, so that we can finally calculate the entire mass of the rocket, because we need that for the calculation. So the parachute which we are going to use has a CD of 1.1. Let's keep 30 as it for now. Let's keep it as default. So it's just there. And wait, let me just change the size of the parachute. Now the parachute is done. So now what we need to do is bring the mass forward, right? So how do we bring the mass forward is we're going to be adding some dead weights to it. So how do you add dead weights is you choose your option. And over here, as you can see, Kushal has forgotten to add the nose cone bulkhead. So I'm just going to add a nose cone bulkhead to it before doing anything. So this is optimization. Okay, so you need to remember what all goes in the rocket and make sure that every part is there and everything is done properly. So let's add a bulkhead. And, let me go with Balsa because Kushal, if you remember, he did a custom WPC on this thing. But right now, since we don't have, I'm not going to do a custom. I'm just going to go with this. Let's keep the thickness as 3. So yeah, so I've placed the nose cone bulkhead for now. And now we just need to add some dead weights to the front. So go to mass component, same option. Let's see, I need to bring it a bit forward, right? So let me add a mass of around 1,800 grams. And let's give it some length as well. So the length I'm going to be giving it is around 12 centimeters in length and dia about 6 centimeters. So now this weight that I'm putting, it includes the mass of the nose step as well. So you might have seen in previous images where we have attached the nose step. So now our stability has come a bit forward. So the CG has moved front. Now I'm going to decrease the, I'm going to bring back the CP. So how do we do that is by changing the fins. So now I've previously put these values, right, for the dummy fins. So now I'm going to change them back. So let's see, let's increase the height a bit. Let's go with 13. Let's see, 27 if I remember. Yeah, and tip chord, let's reduce the tip chord. Let's try increasing the height a bit more, 13.5. Okay, so as you can see now, since I've done the optimization, the apogee has reached 3,474 meters. So that's good. And the fins, I'm going to change the material of the fins as well because it isn't there. We're going to use acrylic and let's go with this. So I feel like now we're done with this. Now I just need to add a few more details to this. So what I'm going to add is, so now since we have gotten a nice stability, I'm going to do add some launch lugs. So you guys know what launch lugs are, right? Or no? So launch lugs are, when we are launching the rocket, we needed to go in a straight upward direction, right? So there is something known as a launch rod from which you'll launch it. So the launch rod holds the rocket in a upward position. So for that, you'll have to use launch lugs to keep your rocket attached to the launch rod. So I'm going to be adding 2 launch lugs in this. So over here, you can see the option of launch lug. So let's go launch lug. I have the dimensions of the launch lug ready. Launch lug materials are like styrofoam or PVC or something like that. So they come in a specific dimension. So this launch lug has 1.61 as its outer diameter. So the radial position is the position of where it stays. So right now, if you see, it's in the same line as the fence. So the rod won't be passing through. So I'll be changing the radial position. Let me give it as minus 60 degrees. I know I'm a bit fast, but please bear with me. So let's keep it at the bottom of the parent component. Okay, so one launch lug is done. Now I'm going to add a second launch lug in the avionics way. So let's go. Same procedure. radial position is also the same value because the rod needs to pass through both of them at once. So bottom component 0, and just you can see it, right? Okay, so the material of this as well, so styrofoam. As you can see now, the component mass is 0.03, right? So in reality, that's not how something would weigh. So I'll go to override mass and override the mass. So let's give it 2 grams. Close. Same way in this launch lug. Override mass 2 grams. So now I've added the launch lug. And now if you see, our thing is done. So we have a fixed mass. Now we're going to go ahead with, wait, sorry. Before that, recovery, as you can see, it's very empty. So we need the lines and the eye bolts, which I showed you yesterday. So we need to add those as well. So I'm just going to be adding the eye bolts. One second. Eye bolts are around 120 grams. Let's keep this. Automotive parent component. So one eye bolt goes there. It's a recovery hardware. Yeah. So now we're going to add another eye bolt in the yeah, okay, so the 2 eye bolts are done. Now we need to add a little bit a shock cord and a swivel key, which I showed you yesterday as well. So now we're going to add the shock cord. So now the shock cord length. So before I add the shock cord length, I'll talk of the parachute. Let me just add the swivel key as well. Swivel link, sorry. Place it at the middle of the parent component. So the swivel key is placed. Now I'm going to go back to parachute. So after this mass you have gotten, you're going to put it in the parachute equations, which I showed you yesterday, and you're going to find the diameter of the parachute. So the diameter of the parachute, which has been calculated right now, is around 240 centimeters. So 240 centimeters is the dimensions of the parachute. Now shroud lines. So shroud lines, as I showed you yesterday, were the suspension lines. So my parachute has a 10 line configuration. So I'm going to add 10 lines in it, and the line length. So the shroud lines length should be good enough so that when it goes out of the recovery system, it can go to that length and properly inflate without having any obstructions. So let's give 250 centimeters as the length of the line. And deploys that. Remember always to change this at apogee if you're doing a normal launch, or else there's other options as well. But for now we're going with apogee. And yeah, so that's there. And wait. So now my parachute is done. Let me go back to the shock cord. So the shock cord needs to be a little bit longer than the parachute so that it doesn't get in the way of the parachute opening up. So around 350 centimeters. I'm going to increase it. And let's keep it at the middle of the parent component. Let's give it a little bit of length, around 10 centimeters. Yeah, cool. So now we're done with this as well. So our stability is around 2.5. There might be something that we can change as well. So let me check if I increase the mass in the forward direction a little bit, what happens. So, okay, wait, 2000. So yeah, it has increased to 2.14. I feel like this optimization is fine. Nirvik is going to be covering the next part. So here, for now, this is what I feel is okay. And I'm going to be handing it over to Nirvik.
Yeah, Anish, before we move on, actually, I think the couplers are misplaced. If you can add.
Oh, okay, 1 second. The couplers. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. I totally forgot that. Okay, I'll
Yeah,
be
no.
quickly adding the couplers as well.
Yeah, by the time Anish is adding the couplers, like we can see that the apogee is reached and we have a good enough stability. So what do you guys think the next step would be? Anyone? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll actually answer the question. Right now we can see we have a target apogee, we have the stability, but we don't actually know that what's going to be the path of the rocket, or is it going to come back safely to the ground, and we don't know what's going on in between the flight. So if we want to check all those stuffs, we can actually make a lot of, we can manufacture a lot of these same models, iterate a little bit of everything and fly them until and unless we get the perfect flight. But that's not gonna be economically feasible, nor it's actually safe, because we are talking about stability. Initially, we don't know what's gonna happen and it can be extremely risky. So the feature which enables us to actually help in this situation in engineering, in all of engineering, is something called simulations. So the first thing we do after actually we end up designing the rocket is do a few simulations, and then we'll actually move into the actual manufacturing phase of the rocket. So first of all, before actually moving into the simulation part through the software, I'll want to talk a little bit about what is actually happening in the background. Pardon me, if you can give me a moment for the presentation to load up. Okay, this how actually OpenRocket simulates and calculates everything. There's a lot of mathematical stuff going on, and I'm not gonna go deep into it, but there's a few stuffs that actually governs the whole thing. The first and foremost part is the Barrowman's equation. This equations helps us to get the actual stability of the rocket, which is mainly calculated by two major terms, which is the conical transition term and the fin terms. And then again, finding the center of pressure and using the mathematical equations that we have, we actually calculate the stability. Now, all of the mathematical equations which are actually used for calculating stability are differential or integral equations. And since solving them is not a really fast way to do it, so we actually rely on a numerical method. And the numerical method, which is explicitly used in OpenRocket software, is Runge-Kutta fourth order method. So now the next part is how actually the OpenRocket calculates the stability and everything. The flight path is based on this flowchart. I'm not gonna go too much into it right now due to the time constraint, but if you guys have any questions, you guys can stay in a bit late and ask me about it. So the main thing is that like what we have done till now are the initial conditions. All the initial conditions are inputted into it, and using the Euler's equations and the acceleration in theoretic frames and stuff, we are gonna simulate the whole thing and get the final results. So now let's, like, not further wasting any time, let's move into the OpenRocket and simulate the thing actually. Okay, can everyone see the ORK window?
Yes.
Yes. So just, yeah, with the rocket design and motor configuration, we have the simulation options. Now, if we click on the new simulations button, it will open up a window which enables us to start the simulation. Now, this window gives us all the liquidity on how to actually set up the initial conditions of the simulation. So according to the launch site where this rocket was launched, we're going to set the launch rod to 518 and the average wind speed to 2.5 meter per second. Now, if we move to the simulation options just beside launch conditions, here you can see the geodetic conditions which we can actually, which we are going to actually use. Now, the spherical approximation is the easiest and the most like closest to what Earth have. The ellipsoid is a bit more like complicated equations to get more approximation and more accuracy. And let's just not talk about flat Earth. I mean, come on. So right now, let's go ahead and simulate and plot what we have. Now, altitude, vertical velocity, and vertical accelerations are the default options, the default plots which you're gonna get. And just for simplicity's sake, we're not gonna use a lot of parameters there, but we'll add two most important parameters. Now, yeah, if we click on new y-axis plot type, we're gonna have all the parameters that can be put into the simulation. So now the first parameter which we are gonna insert is stability margin caliper. So this parameter is going to give us the whole stability throughout the flight. And the second thing we want to know is what's actually the thrust. We want the thrust time curve, what's going on during the flight of the rocket. Now just right to it, we can see the flight events. For the description right now, we're going to select all of the flight events and see what's going on at each time. Anish, if you can go on and plot it. Okay, so this is the plot like which we are getting for the separate parameters that we have chosen. So now the stability that you can actually see on the window behind it, where the model of the rocket is there, that's the stability when it's stationary. But we want the stability to be between 1.5 and 2, as Anish said before, when it actually leaves the launch rod. So now let's zoom into the position where the rocket actually leaves the launch rod. Okay, so this is the part where we have. Now, if we zoom in, we want to make sure that the stability just at the launch rod is like what we want. It should be between 1.5 and 2. Yep. So now we can see it's somewhere below, between 1.5 and 1.75. So this is something we want. Now, Anish, zoom out a bit. Yeah, zoom in on the stability margin again. By the way, the pink one is the stability margin for if somebody is not, it's not clear to somebody. So along with the value of stability margin at the launch rod, we want to make sure there is not much oscillation during the flight time. So the pink line that you can see is the oscillation, like the deflection of stability margin. And right now it's fairly good during the ascent, and even after burnout, it's like dies down smoothly. So it's fine. The next important thing during the simulation which we have to see is what's the thrust at launch rod. What's the thrust to weight ratio explicitly? Yep, Anish, zoom in on that. Pardon me for going so fast, but yeah, I know it's been a long time you guys have been sitting. So yeah, as we can see, just at the launch rod, the thrust, the value of thrust there is coming around 2165. So what we want to do with this value is there's something called a launch criteria for solid rocket. Does anyone know what it is or what the thrust to weight ratio should be? Okay, if not, then answer one question. Like if you want the rocket to fly, what should the thrust to weight ratio be?
Any value more than 1.
It should be greater than 1, right? Yeah. So, but actually with the safety factors taken into consideration, it's not more than 1. The explanation for that is a bit lengthy, and I'll not get into it why it is. If you want to know, like, you can just stay behind and ask. But there's something called a max Q, where the aerodynamics force on the rocket is maximum, and at that time we want what is the thrust at that point? It should be around 2.5 times according to the calculations, and taking a factor of safety of 2, the thrust to weight ratio, which is considered safe universally, is 5 at the launch rod. Now if you can see, it's almost 2165 Newton there, and the mass of the rocket is around 22 kg. So roughly, if we divide it, we can say it's gonna be around 9 point something, which is way above our estimation. And since like it's not something like that you can take the thrust value high enough just to satisfy the criteria, because as said earlier, you need to make sure that your structure can actually take the thrust value. So here we have seen that the earlier criteria is fully satisfied, and also the thrust to weight ratio is satisfied. So this will more or less like be all for the simulation in OpenRocket. So right now we'll move back into the presentations. So does anyone have any questions?
Where are we gonna import the CAD? Someone told yesterday in the workshop that CAD will be imported.
CAD, are you talking about the modeled CAD or the ORK?
Yeah, someone told that the model that we the parts we make in CAD are imported in ORK and then fitted in here.
Yeah, so the mass override that you have seen like during the making of the centering rings and stuff, right? That is actually right now we know like we already have the data on the rocket, like what the manufactured parts weigh and stuff. So we have already overridden it. But when you're making a model from the scratch, you want to make the CAD and actually then again change the weight of all the components to what the actual weight is gonna be. So while we are making the stuff, we already took care of it. Okay. So now that you have seen the simulation, you now have a basic idea how to design a rocket, and if the next step would be like making the CAD of it, and that concludes the design of the rocket in just one part. But that's not all. For actually being able to fly a rocket, you need to check each and every part of the rocket, simulate each and every one of them, and see if the parts separately are good enough to actually fly. Can they take the stress? Are they working as they are supposed to be? So here we have a few simulations which were done on the Veo rocket, and this one is like specifically, this simulation is a pressure contour on the rocket. This is something like which we have not shown yet. This is a state separation, and all other aerodynamics simulations.
Yeah, Nirvik, your cursor is not visible. So if you could just explain like top right, bottom right.
The top left rocket, which you can see, is showing the pressure contours on the rocket. And the image just beside it, where you can see the rocket with two set of fins, that is a rocket for like staging purpose, and it shows the aerodynamic simulations throughout the rocket, how the pressure is gonna vary, how the flow around it is gonna be. Then on the bottom left corner, we have a simulation of the motor head. This shows the thermal, how the heat is dissipating through the liner into the material, or how the structural is gonna hold. And beside that, we have a schematic of the working flight computer. And this all of these simulations are supposed to be done before actually these things can go into the rocket. Now here, like in the top left corner, you can see the fin attachment. Like Tusha has talked about the fin attachment. We know that we designed it, we put it into work, but we don't know if it's gonna work. If it's gonna like take all the stresses that that's gonna be on it. So we need to design everything. Also similarly, there you can see two of them are the nozzle simulations where you can see the flow. If the flow is correct, if there's a separation of plume from the nozzle. And lastly, in the bottom right corner, we have a thermal and structural coupled simulation of the nozzle side of the motor. So once actually you have simulated each and every separate part and make iterations on it and finally designed it, went back to modeling, imported everything back to ORK again, and after several iterations, you are actually in a position when you will be able to go ahead and manufacture a rocket. So with this, more or less, the session on ORK, basically on the software, is over. So regarding what is done till now, do you guys have any questions?
Yeah, Nirvik, you can wrap up the future scope wala section.
Okay.
Pretty good.
Okay. Now we have done a very basic modeling, designing and modeling on the ORK, but ORK or Open Rocket is a very powerful tool. It enables us to do a lot of things. Now, one of the things that you have seen right now in the simulation was staging. And as you can see on the top, in the left corner here, like there are two basic type of staging. One is serial staging and one is parallel staging. So both of this type of staging can actually be simulated in the Open Rocket. You can have two motor bays or like parallel motor bays as shown like in the bottom of the picture, and you can like at the time when it should go off, what and like when the first stage or the booster stage is done, all of the simulations can be done there. Similarly, RCS is something which have a future scope. Like you can actually try to control the ascent of your rocket in the ORK itself. Beside the reaction control, the one you can see beside the staging is a Orion shuttle from Orion capsule, NASA's Orion capsule, and it depicts the RCS or reaction control system of the capsule itself. Below that, there is something called thrust vector control, where you can actually move around the motor itself or the nozzle itself to get a desired path of the rocket, or so that the stability and like the drift of the rocket is minimum. Beside that, we have something called a silo, where all of this stuff can actually be simulated in the Open Rocket software. Lastly, what you can do is we have talked about COTS and SRAD motor. So there's also a provision. If you're making a motor by yourself, there's a provision to do that, but it's out of the scope right now to say how you can actually make a motor. I'll just go through the steps briefly, what you do. Like while making a motor, the first step we have is to actually obviously go and select the propellant what we have. Here, for example, we've taken ammonium perchlorate based propellants. So once you have done selecting the propellant, there's a few softwares like SRM Sheet or Solid Rocket Motor Sheet by Richard Naka. You guys can check him out. Then there's RPA, Rocket Propulsion Analysis softwares. So you want to decide the chamber pressure, what you want to have, reiterate, check the data, if simulate it to see if it's holding. Then you want to go through and design the nozzle for the motor itself. It will be mostly different every time. For the thrust value you want, for the burn time you want, you have to go through all the designing of all the equations here. I'm not going to delve into it right now. Then the last step is like making the motor and checking if it's the class of motor if you want, the thrust that you're getting, and all of those are on par what you need to actually fly the rocket you have designed to apogee. And then once you're done with designing the motor, there's something called thrust curve tool. Using that, you can import this all data into the tool and export a file with an extension of ENG, which is basically engine file, and that engine file can be imported into Open Rocket to actually use the motor which you have made for the simulations. So with that, we would like to conclude here, and if you guys have any questions, you can go on. And Abhinav, let's wrap up right now.
Okay, so yeah, so with that, we have officially come to an end to the Open Rocket workshop and session 2 also. and hopefully it was an interesting session and informative as well for you guys. I know we rushed a bit because of the time constraint and we already overshot it by twice. And the last part or the other sections that you may or may not have any doubts about, you can email it to us, or else you can InstaPay, you can DM it to us, and we'll try our level best to answer all your doubts and questions. And the videos of these two recordings will be made available to you either by email links, or we'll send it to you on Instagram itself, and it will be uploaded on YouTube, so you can have access to it as and when you want. And apart from that, before ending, could we have a session where everybody switches on their video cams, and let's just say goodbye over here. Yeah. Thank you, Akhilesh. Yeah, Nirvik is on. Yeah. Everyone else, please.
Yeah, I had a doubt actually.
Abhinav, can you stop sharing?
Yeah, sure.
I had a doubt. Last session there was some.
One second. Can everyone take a screenshot of this if you want to mail your doubts to us or send your queries on Instagram? Okay. So I'll wait for a couple of seconds and then I'll stop this screenshot.
Yeah, go on with the doubt.
Yeah, last session there was some talk about certificate or something. What about it?
So
certificates will be mailed to you.
Okay.
Mailed to you by the Student Council of Manipal.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So we also have 2 other rocketry events for the main actual Tech Tattva, and one of them is a quiz, launch or not. And since you guys did attend this workshop, I think that you'll have an upper edge over the other contestants. It's a team event and you guys can take part in it, and either individually or with team, but it's preferable that you go with the team. And there are prizes also, and cash prizes also, so it'll be better if you guys also can attend. And if you guys like rocketry and have interest in rocketry, I think it'll be a fun event for you. And for the other geeks who are interested in avionics and softwares or coding extensively, and we did not cover that much in our ORK workshop because it was out of the scope of the software. We can't code or do anything in this software regarding avionics or electronics. So there's a hackathon also coming up, and I think it's from 5th to 7th. You guys can check it out on the Escape Velocity Instagram page itself and register it and register there also. That event also has prize money, so maybe if that's an incentive for you guys, you can attend. Other than that, thank you, and if anyone has questions, they can stay back or mail it to us on the previously shown email ID.